You're listening to the Junior Birdman Podcast.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Junior Birdman Podcast. I am your host, the Junior Birdman. If you like this video, make sure you click the like button, comment down below on what you see. Make sure you share this video with your friends, subscribe to the channel, share this channel, share the video, let everybody else know that you like it too. Normally, we like to have a lot of fun on the Junior Birdman Podcast, but today going to be a little bit more somber. We have a little bit more serious conversation that we're going to be talking about. We're going to be joined by Dr. Jordan Peterman. Dr. Peterman is a PhD in clinical psychology from the University of Billings. He has a BA in political science from the same institution. He's taught at many Ivy League institutions, written several books, been on many lecture tours. We've talked with him a few times in the past, and we expect to have a great conversation again here today. Dr. Peterman, thanks for joining us here today on the Junior Birdman Podcast.
It's an absolute pleasure to join you again today.
Well, thanks. It's always a pleasure to have you as well, sir. If you would, can you talk a little bit about, today we see a lot of young men struggling to find heroes, and once in a while they find one. And I think what we see in this storyline, we talked about this before the interview, with somebody like Peter Parker and the people that support him, he offers a lot of inspiration to young men and the challenges they face, and I'm sure he's a big inspiration to a lot of people, not just to his fans. Can you talk about, what he means to some of the young men who are struggling out there in today's society?
I think it's critical to look at the choices that a character like Peter Parker makes every day and relate it to our own lives and try to be critical of ourselves and try to look at that and try to understand how it relates to the way we live our lives every day.
When you look back at his life, why do you think it's so important for Peter to keep his identity as Spider-Man a secret? He doesn't want anybody to know that he's actually Spider-Man. He hides it. He doesn't even let his aunt know, let alone, his girlfriend. He hides his identity from everybody. He tries to keep it a secret. Why do you think that it's so important for him to keep his identity a secret from everybody, even his own family?
Well, it's an excellent question, and there's a lot in the literature that speaks to that and the nature of responsibility and the weight that comes with it. What you see here is Peter understanding his responsibility as Spider-Man. He's got to go out and fight crime, and that's not an easy thing to do. I mean, come on, man. You're out there fighting some of the most ruthless gangs in New York City, and it's got to take a toll on you, And yet here he is, he's loved by many, he's hated by others, and in the whole time he's got to keep himself secret. You go back and reflect to some of the earlier literature on the subject, and you look at some of the struggles he had just trying to cope with the death of his own uncle, and keeping this whole persona as a secret is critical to the existence of Spider-Man for Peter Parker. He has to keep that level of separation between himself and the persona of this superhero. He's got to keep his own loved ones safe. I mean, it's a lot of responsibility, especially for such a young man. In the world today, somebody carrying that kind of burden, it's a heavy responsibility. It's a lot to carry on the shoulders of somebody. And furthermore, I think Spider-Man's secret identity speaks to the idea of the individualism and the importance of maintaining one's own identity, separate from the group or the collective. He keeps his identity a secret. He's trying to keep a sense of self for him, for his own sense of being and understanding his own role as Spider-Man and the critical role he plays in society. And he has to keep all that in mind when he's trying to maintain a healthy and balanced life just for himself.
So when you look at Peter, do you think that he struggles with just the burden itself and the responsibility And do you actually, I want to, do you think that his burden and responsibility, you know, the idea of trying to keep that a secret, do you think that impacts the way he deals with some of these supervillains? Psychologically, I would think that that has to weigh on you as a superhero, that you're out there not only with the burden of taking on a supervillain, but you have to hide your identity because you can't allow this supervillain to even know who you are. And that extra burden would impact the way you just take on the average supervillain when you're out there, you know, fighting crime in the city. So do you think that matters? And
Well, absolutely. The burden of responsibility is something that Peter Parker struggles with constantly, something he has to weigh in on a daily basis throughout his journey. As Spider-Man and as a superhero, he's tasked with not only protecting the citizens of New York from harm, but protecting his own family, protecting the people he loves. It's no small feat, man. Requires a lot of sacrifice, a lot of dedication. You know, and in terms of the Green Goblin, I think Peter does have a sense that his responsibility to keep him down because of his awareness of Peter Parker's role in society. He knows who Peter Parker really is. And, you know, that's something he doesn't want to cope with. I mean, your darkest enemy is out there and he knows exactly who you are. So he knows how to get to you. He knows how to get to your loved ones. And that's got to be a dark cloud hovering over his head. You know, the goblin knows exactly who he is. And that kind of pressure that I'm sure Peter feels on a daily basis, it's a lot for a young man to carry, especially when your little responsibility is protecting a big city like New York. And he's got to protect all his loved ones too from all the harm they may face. And, you know, I've thought about this a lot. And despite the heavy burden Peter has, I think he remains steadfast in his commitment and responsibility as Spider-Man. I think that that's something he's able to carry on. And he knows that the city's in peril with the Green Goblin out there, and he's got to do everything he can to make sure justice is served. And so he's got to do what it takes to fulfill his own duty, his own responsibility. He's got to look inside and understand what it means not only to be a superhero, but what it means to be a man in today's society. You look around and you see all the struggles of the people every day, and he's got to be there to champion them too, man.
do you think that part of Peter's resentment for the Green Goblin stems just from the fact that Green Goblin is the only one out there who actually knows his real identity?
Well, it's an interesting point. You know, it speaks to the idea of one's own identity and the internal conflicts that comes with. You know, it's true, Peter does have resentment towards the Goblin. And that does, in fact, stem from him knowing his own identity as Spider Man. So that knowledge is not taken lightly, not something he can neglect because it puts his loved ones in great harm. So he has to be ready to go. He has to be there to help them. However, I don't think that he has resentment solely due to the fact that the Goblin knows his identity. I think he has some resentment for the fact that the Goblin has some freedom and is able to do things that Peter could never do. As a superhero, the Goblin's not restrained by the law. The Goblin's not restrained. He goes out and does whatever he feels like out in society. He's not restrained by anybody that's going to stop him. The cops aren't going to stop him. There's nobody going to stop him. The only one that can stop him is Peter Parker and Spider-Man. And the Goblin knows exactly who he is. He knows exactly what his weaknesses are. And that's the people Peter loves. And so the Goblin is constantly going to be a conflict for Peter and constantly somebody he's going to have to struggle with. I also think Peter has this sense of responsibility in the role he plays and what his role is when it comes to the Green Goblin. And as a superhero, I think he understands that he has a duty to protect the citizens, and he takes that very seriously. And the Goblin's not going to stop that. It's certainly not going to stop him from protecting his own loved ones. And if that means he's got to get a little angry, man, he's going to do it. Sometimes he's going to lose it, man. In the end, I think Peter's resentment towards the goblin is a little complex. I mean, there's not a lot in the literature about this. You go back and you look at some of the early comics, and there's not a lot that talks about Peter's resentment of the goblin. So you're left with a lot of insinuation in looking at their literature and trying to understand what the real emotional driving factor is of somebody like Peter Parker when it comes to the goblin.
Now, I made a note here because earlier you mentioned his uncle and his family. So I'm wondering, so when Peter first gets his powers, he's a young man and all he's thinking about at the time is, how can I go out and make some money, you know? He goes out, he does that, and ends up costing his uncle his life. And that seems to have turned Peter around completely. At that point, he seems to have a breakthrough. Can you speak a little to the growth of Peter as a character from this selfish kid, you know, with these selfish goals of profit, to somebody who's out there now trying, you know, to save the city and maybe even the world from supervillains?
Absolutely, certainly. Peter Parker's growth as a character is one of the most compelling aspects of the Spider-Man story. When we first meet Peter, he's just a typical teenager. He's got his own issues. He's got his own struggles like they all do, like teenagers. He's focused on himself a lot. He's self-centered. The world around him is all that really matters. That's the way young kids are, man. You know, and then when he gets his powers, he sees an opportunity to make some quick money and elevate his social status. I mean, you know, he's a young man at that point. He's trying to make his own way, you know. And he learns the lesson that, you know, that decision to be greedy and to be self-centered comes with a great cost. And his Uncle Ben ends up being killed based on Peter's own actions. He has a chance to stop the criminal who's ultimately going to result in his own uncle's demise, and it lets him get away and decides that his own wealth and gratitude is more important. In the end, his uncle perishes because of it. And that kind of forces Peter to reevaluate his life's decisions. And it's a pivotal moment in the development of the character. It forces him to look beyond his own desires and consider the greater good. And from that point, we see significant growth in Peter's character. He learns to balance new responsibilities as Spider-Man in his own personal life. He realizes there's great power with the responsibility he has. He's willing to make those sacrifices, do what's necessary to live up to the responsibility, whether it's protecting the citizens of New York or his own loved ones, even his own family. He's constantly demonstrating this commitment to do what's right, even in the face of great struggle. And that points to great growth in this character and becoming a man who's able to control his own destiny. And, you know, there's real consequences to the things Peter's involved with. You know, he's saving along lives. He's doing a lot to help the city. And I think that kind of transformation from a self-centered teenager to this responsible adult is really what makes him such an endurable character for the audience, but everybody that listens to the story.
Do you think that despite him being the cause of his death, that Peter thinks his uncle is proud of him now?
I believe it's clear that Peter carries a great deal of guilt over the death of his Uncle Ben. And it's likely that he struggles with that on a daily basis and has to constantly struggle with whether or not his uncle would actually be proud of him in the face of knowing that his uncle's passed away because of his lack of commitment to doing the right thing at the time. And now that Peter's maybe dedicated his life to fighting crime and protecting the people of New York, I imagine most people would see that situation and say, well, your uncle must be very proud of you and what you've done. But on the other hand, Peter has this great burden he carries with him of knowing that he allowed this to happen when he had this great power. And this guilt of his uncle's death is a massive burden that he must feel responsible for all the time. It's got to be something he carries with him. And You know, it's also important to remember, if you look back at some of the earlier literature, that the relationship he had with his uncle, he was like a real mentor, man. I mean, his uncle was there for him. His uncle was doing a lot of things with him, trying to help develop this young man into a full-grown, responsible adult. And, you know, Peter would have likely become that full-blown, responsible man anyways, had his uncle lived and had he never gotten his superpowers. But with the power he has, Peter and the ability to really make a difference. Like, I think it's a burden he lives with, but I think he also knows that his uncle's probably very proud of the things he's done with the powers that he's been given.
Okay. I wonder if you can talk about the colors Peter chose for his costume and the psychology of the color selection and what that means.
Oh, I think the color of his outfit's highly symbolic. Reveals a lot about his character. The red's very bold, very dynamic color associated with a lot of passion and energy and strength. And, you know, it's a very fitting choice for a character like Spider-Man. You know, very agile superhero, moves quickly, decisively, fights crime. So red often associated with danger as well and warning. So very appropriate that he gives off this sense of warning and fear to his opponents who know he's out there and he's going to have to do battle with them on a daily basis. And you have blue, which is this calming, stable color associated with trust and intelligence and loyalty. And so you got the citizens of New York who are looking at this man, most of them, and seeing him as a hero. And not everybody does. Some people still think he's a villain, you know, because they're ignorant. But he's obviously a hero.
Yep.
And so that blue color gives a lot of calm to the people of the city. They know they can trust the man.
Right.
In blue and red. They know that they can trust that man, that he's got their best interest at heart. And, you know, together, the red and blue has a striking, powerful contrast. Shows a lot of the duality of Peter's personality. His passion, he's driven, his individualism, but somewhere out there, he's grounded and stable and reliable, and he can be counted on. And so those colors, they reflect a much larger theme in the Spider-Man story, including the conflict between power and responsibility, the struggle between good and evil, the importance of maintaining a sense of balance and stability in one's life. And overall, I think the colors Peter chose are a little bit of a disguise in his reflection of his complex, multifaceted character. I think they speak to a darker theme, maybe, behind the message of Spider-Man. I think you can see that in some of the earlier literature, too.
I have one more question for you. And I know we're running a little bit long here, but this has just been absolutely phenomenal. But I do want to ask you one more thing before I let you go, and that's related to the spider that actually Peter was bitten by. You know, some spiders out there are just downright mean. They're going to eat their own mate. You know. Others just want to be left alone. They just want to eat and survive. Some are very active at building webs. Some of them just, you know, they just don't stop. Peter's radioactive spider was grafted from multiple species. Now, if one of the species grafted into the spider that had bitten Peter were a black widow, it was easy that it's possible that Peter could have turned out as a very different character than he did. As opposed to being a crime fighter, he may have been something with very villainous ambitions. Is that true?
Well, it's certainly possible that the spider that bit Peter contained more DNA from one species or the other, that his personality, his abilities would be quite different. You know, I don't think anybody questions that. I would think it's important to remember that the Spider-Man story, you know, the whole idea of him being bitten by the radioactive spider and becoming superhuman, you know, to a pure product of his willingness to go out and explore He's in a science lab. He's out there wandering away from the group, so he's also got this little rebellious streak in him as a young man. And I think that's part of what ultimately allows him to become Spider-Man too. That being said, the idea of genetics influencing personality is something that goes back a long way. The behavior is very interesting, and there's certainly evidence to suggest that the genetic traits are influential on risk-taking behavior, impulsivity, emotional regulation, all the traits we see often associated with superheroes like Spider-Man. However, you also have to balance that and remember that genetics are only one piece of the puzzle when it comes to shaping a person's overall character and abilities. Environmental factors, upbringing, life experience, they all play a factor in a significant role. In the end, I think it's safe to say that Peter Parker's character and his abilities are shaped more by the complex nature of the interplay of factors, including his unique genetic makeup, the spider that bit him, as well as his life experiences, the choices he makes along the way. Ultimately, those are the factors that play a much more compelling role and make Spider-Man a much more relatable character. I mean, not everybody gets bitten by a radioactive spider, but anybody can be a hero. And so the idea that Peter strives to be a hero in the face of overwhelming challenges is part of what makes him such a beloved character to children of all ages and adults.
Dr. Peterman, this has been absolutely fascinating. I can't thank you enough for joining us today, providing all of these insights. I know our audience has very much appreciated everything. This has, I'm sure, been as enjoyable for them as it is for me. Thanks again for joining us today on the Junior Birdman podcast. I hope we get to talk again soon.
Always a pleasure to speak with you, Birdman.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Junior Birdman podcast. Be sure to like this video, share this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notifications bell to be alerted when new videos are posted.